so she planned to come visit me in India with my mom, her sister, and had arranged to be in Calcutta at the time that Mother Teresa was there, because she would always try, she was often traveling. So we spent quite a long time in Calcutta with her, and we lived in the dorms. It was extremely well organized, the system that she had there. There was the main convent, which, we had mass every morning at sunrise that she would lead. And there were dozens, if not over 100 volunteers there at any given time. And they would be sent to different, missions around the city. And so I would work, as I said, at the House of the Dying. My mother would go over to the Children's Hospital, and we'd spend our days working and volunteering with the patients, depending on where we were. But it was a very well-oiled machine, I like to say. I learned a lot about project management, leadership, just watching how the nuns operated, the way that they interacted with the volunteers, the extremely deep and profound connection and respect that they had for people who had been largely forgotten and abandoned on the streets of Calcutta and picked up by these folks and just treated with such reverence and love. It was an enormous expansion of my heart and my mind and my awareness of how important it is to meet people where they are and treat everyone with incredible amount of integrity and love, no matter what you're facing.
Carolina, welcome to From Vision to Creation. I'm so excited to have you here today. Thank you for doing this with me.
I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
You've built such an incredible career at the intersection of service, leadership, and storytelling, from founding legal art back in law school to leading organizations like National Young Arts Foundation and United States Artists, to now serving as CEO of the Elevate Prize Foundation. You've dedicated your life to amplifying change makers and giving them the resources, visibility, and wellness tools they need to thrive, which I think is really amazing because there aren't a lot of people doing what you're doing. I also love that your own journey has been shaped by such rich and powerful experiences, from growing up as the daughter of Cuban refugees to traveling through India and even meeting and working with Mother Teresa, which I'm sure you have a bunch of stories about. So I'm excited to dive into that. And to coining your whole leader philosophy that's changing the way we think about leadership and social impact. I can't wait to dive into your story, your lessons, and the bold work you're leading now with Elevate Prize Foundation and Elevate Studios.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So, Carolina, you're the daughter of Cuban refugees, born in Spain, and then raised in the suburbs of Orlando. How did that background shape your perspective on identity and service?
I think it largely shaped my viewpoint about my place in the world, that I didn't grow up feeling like I was completely safe, that there was always some sense of the potential it could all be lost, right? And I think for immigrants, whether they're refugees or immigrants by choice, they carry those stories with them. They want to pass those stories on to their children so that they feel connected to those cultures and those places from which they came. And when you layer upon that the trauma of refugee, of exile, then there's a lot of what is inherited as a child is this feeling of insecurity, and like I need to always be aware of my safety, that I'm being taken care of. And it taught me from an early age kind of this idea of non-attachment, which I didn't know that phrase until much later, in a different kind of spiritual journey. But it was very helpful for me as a child because it made me aware of and very empathetic toward other people who had lost their place in the world, whether it was because of the same reasons like mine or for a host of other reasons that kind of leave people feeling a little bit lost or not able to feel at home and safe where they are.
And you spent a year traveling through India in college. What exactly made you decide to travel to India and spend so much time there?
Well, in college, I was a double major. I majored in poetry, but I also majored in women's studies. And at the time, that was a pretty unusual and unheard of major. Now it's luckily, gratefully, a lot more common. And there were very few study abroad programs available within that major. And I'd always had a really strong connection to India. I grew up around a lot of South Asians and was exposed to the culture very young and just loved it and was very curious about the culture. And it happened to be a really seminal year in terms of women in South Asia and India in particular, because it was the year of the Beijing Conference on Women, where Hillary Clinton very famously said, human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. And that year, India sort of came alive with the feminist movement. And I was very lucky to study with a number of feminists and scholars and writers all over the country. And of course, the highlight was meeting Mother Teresa, but the entire year was really a deep dive of an understanding about women's roles around the world. And I think for young people, it's so important to sort of get out of your own country, get out of the place that you've grown up and see perspectives of what it's like for different types of, gender expressions and experiences around the world. So for me, that was extremely eye-opening. I was 20 years old, so it very much planted the seeds and set the stage for the impact journey I was going to commit myself to from that point forward. I don't think I ever looked back and questioned whether my career should be one that was about service. It was very much rooted in that year that I spent in India.
I read that you primarily worked with victims of women, specifically victims who were victims of abuse and bride burning. I had never heard of this before. Can you kind of talk to us about, first of all, what bride burning is, but also how you ended up working with these women?
India is a really fascinating culture because in many ways it's a matriarchal culture. Women are leaders. They're given a lot of authority in their communities. There's a certain percentage of parliament that's reserved for women, so that's a more advanced viewpoint than even we have in the United States. But their struggles are different. They're different in different parts of the world, and unique in South Asia and in India in particular. There are still certain communities where a woman's main value is through the dowry and the value that she brings into a marriage. This again was many, many years ago. I think that this practice is hopefully a lot less common than it is today. But in that time, and when I was working with Mother Teresa in Calcutta, there were a number of women who were victims of something that was called bride burning, where the dowry had run out or it was insufficient, and the family of the husband's family wanted to get rid of the wife or punish the wife or her family because they wanted to get more money out of them. This is an oversimplification. This isn't always the case, but many of the women who we were treating at the House of the Dying in Calcutta were victims of this. And of course, it was heartbreaking because not only were they being physically harmed by their own family, but in most cases, they were cast out and they were not allowed, in many cases, to remarry. And so they were facing a very dire future as women. And I think as a culture and what we were studying in women's studies at the time was how did we not only prevent this from happening, but educate the public about the value of women in a marriage and how they should have more rights in the institution of marriage.
And can you talk to us about how you began working with Mother Teresa? That I just find
Mhm.
that so fascinating.
Of course. It's actually by luck. It had nothing to do with the program I was studying. It's because my aunt, Norma, whose birthday is today, actually, she is a lifelong, very committed, deeply spiritual Catholic and had very much admired and loved Mother Teresa her whole life. And so she planned to come visit me in India with my mom, her sister, and had arranged to be in Calcutta at the time that Mother Teresa was there because she would always try, she was often traveling. So we spent quite a long time in Calcutta with her, and we lived in the dorms. It was extremely well organized, the system that she had there. There was the main convent, which, we had mass every morning at sunrise that she would lead. And there were dozens, if not over 100 volunteers there at any given time. And they would be sent to different missions around the city. And so I would work, as I said, at the House of the Dying. My mother would go over to the Children's Hospital, and we'd spend our days working and volunteering with the patients, depending on where we were. But it was a very well-oiled machine, I like to say. I learned a lot about project management, leadership, just watching her, watching how the nuns operated, the way that they interacted with the volunteers, the extremely deep and profound connection and respect that they had for people who had been largely forgotten and abandoned on the streets of Calcutta and picked up by these folks and just treated with such reverence and love. It was an enormous expansion of my heart and my mind and my awareness of how important it is to meet people where they are and treat everyone with incredible amount of integrity and love, no matter what you're facing. And like I said, the house that I was working in were people who were at the end of their life, so I was feeding and bathing and working with women, because I was in the women's ward, who had acute disease or had been on the streets for a very long time, or like I said, were victims of bride burning. And just to be able to spend time with them was one of the greatest gifts of my life. I'd never really been exposed to anything like that before. So as you can imagine, it did shape me in many ways. And just getting to meet Mother Teresa was, I think at the time, I didn't quite appreciate what a big deal that was, because I was so young. But looking back, she passed away not long after that. I think about a year and a half after that. And you would have never known looking at her. She was already, older, but she had so much energy. She was really a dynamo.
And how did it feel for you, years later when she was made a saint, and knowing that you worked with her and you got to actually meet her?
Well, that's who saints should be. Someone like her. She is such an example of a saint, who was put on this earth and just lived her full purpose in service of others and in spreading love and in it, really making the world aware and reminding all of us that we are human beings having a spiritual experience. We are really a very deeply spiritual race of humanity, and that we're here to connect with other people. And just by watching her and learning that, knowing that we are deeply just affected by everyone around us. And I think she stood for such important values in terms of taking care of those people who've been largely neglected and forgotten and overlooked and abused by the system, and that we're all equal at the end of the day. So yeah, it was just a great honor. I mean, I love speaking about her because I think there are many people in the world like her who don't get the light shined on them, which is a big reason why I think the work of Elevate is so important. Sainthood is a wonderful, wonderful thing to have, like a Nobel Peace Prize or an Oscar. But there are so many people out there in the world doing work just like that who don't get those kind of accolades, and which is the very reason we're so motivated by the work we do at Elevate.
And Carolina, you were talking about how, your childhood made you, certain parts of your childhood made you feel a little insecure as a child, and kind of feeling like things were just going to come to an end. Nothing really felt permanent. But what role did your family play in shaping your early ambitions and sense of purpose?
Hmm. That's a great question. I'm married to someone who's also a child of immigrants, and we often think about the impact that our parents had on us. And in both cases, and especially in my husband's case, they were the only ones, to leave their country. They came to the United States, and so we grew up with these parents who were sort of the big risk takers and left everything behind. They were different sets of circumstances, but I think it taught us by example not to be too attached to the things that we live with, to the comforts that we have, that it's okay to leave it all behind in service of something greater than ourselves. And just this sort of sense of adventure and this sense of possibility and potential for this one great life that we're given in this body, and just go for it. Like I think both of us come from parents like that who just really largely went for it, and that very much inspired me and my husband and his own career too. So I think they taught us that. They taught us to have a real interest in diversity and diversity of ideas and cultures. Like I said, I grew up with a lot of South Asians. I grew up with a lot of folks from all different backgrounds, even though I was in Central Florida, which wasn't the most diverse place in the 1980s. But we sought that out as a family. And I really appreciate my parents for doing that, for making sure that we were exposed to all kinds of culture, artistic culture, and curiosity about food, about music. There was always music playing in my house. And I give my parents a lot of credit for that, because now as a parent myself, I know that that's an effort you have to make. You really need to make sure you fill your children's cup with interesting, stimulating, world-centric ideas, and make sure that their viewpoints are larger than just a little world that they can live in at home.
And hearing you say that actually makes a lot of sense, because when I was reading through your story, immediately the first question in my mind was, who were her parents? Who were her family? Because I know that our families have a lot to do with the career choices that we make, our ambition, things like that. So hearing this makes a lot of sense to me.
I wrote in college, I don't know, was it considered a thesis? I'm not sure. I wrote a cookbook, and the cookbook was following the women in my family through migration and seeing how food and culture and sort of rituals around eating changed, because I had an uncle who married a Swedish woman, and I had, another aunt who married a Puerto Rican man. And so there was a lot of different cultures in our family. And I thought that food was such an interesting through line in terms of understanding how we changed over generations. And I've just always loved that. I think that, I'm very proud of being a Latina, but I'm also very proud of now having married an Indian man, and that my children are a mix of these cultures. I think that's a really exciting thing in the world.
I want to circle back to India for a second, because I know while you were doing humanitarian work there, I know you felt very purpose, very involved. You were quite literally working with a saint. Uh, um, what was the motivating force behind going to law school once you came back?
That's a great question. I was just going back a little further. I was a competitive debater in high school. It was a real passion of mine. I went to summer camps for debate. It was a very serious passion of mine. And I'd always loved and thrived in that environment of research and debate, and just really taking an issue and going deeply into it. And so the law school always attracted me in theory, but I didn't see really myself as a practicing attorney per se. So fast forward all those years of college in India and coming back and going to New York City, I then lived through 9/11 in New York, which was, for everyone there, obviously a deeply traumatic and life-changing experience, and knew by then that I wanted to be in public service, and felt I needed sort of the next layer of education and experience, because I wanted to run a foundation. I wanted to run my own organization. And law school presented me a chance to sort of leave New York for a little while. I came down to the University of Miami for law school, and then also pursue this kind of bigger idea that I had around, I saw the potential to innovate in the nonprofit sector, even at that beginning of my career. And I felt that law school would give me the tools, courage, commitment, all these things, resources to innovate, so that I could do that, break down some barriers. And I did. I mean, right away, my first year in law school, I started my first nonprofit, Legal Art. And so it was a good move on my part, in terms of knowing that I had this particular ambition to have a more entrepreneurial pathway into the nonprofit sector, and law school gave me that in so many ways. It was the greatest decision, really, for my career.
In what ways did it prepare you immediately, that you're able to recognize immediately after? And was there ever a point where formal education only went so far and you had to kind of continue your education, so to speak, but in the real world?
Yes, that's a great question too. I'm a very big believer in, you follow the educational path that allows you always to have a love of learning. If that's, Ivy League, that's great. If that's community college, that's great. If that's studying in Italy, that's great. Like, just make sure you're always in an environment with the conditions that you're still wanting to learn and try something. So in law school, I was either lucky enough or smart enough to figure out the first year that I wanted to start my own nonprofit. We had done what's called OCI, on-campus interviews, our first year, to get that summer internship. And the only types of interviews that they had at the law school was to go work at the public defender's office or to go into a big law firm. And I went into the OCI office and I said, well, what about someone like me who wants to work in the arts and wants to work in nonprofit? And they said, well, we don't really have anything for you. I said, okay, well, then that means I need to start something. So I found a professor who's still there, Professor Stotsky, and convinced him to give me independent study credit, which I went on to get for 2.5 years, a semester. I think it was 4 or 5 semesters of credit, to build a nonprofit called Legal Art with a partner at the time, Lara O'Neill. And right away, we took off and built this incredible organization that went on to exist for many, many years after that. So the school gave me the sort of the security to do that, the resources to do that. And I didn't really have to make money for it from it at the beginning, because I was getting credit for it for law school. So it allowed me to kind of build it really organically. I always tell young students, I'm now on the board at the law school for an LLM program there, the Entertainment, Arts, and Sports Law LLM, which is a fantastic program. And I tell these young students all the time, like, start stuff in law school, because the pressure's so low, that the risk is so low, and you can try so many new things. And I think a lot of people attracted to law school have that kind of mind, but it's it's dulled. It's greatly dulled if you go into big law or into other areas of the law. But I think the law also attracts really entrepreneurial people, and so I was really lucky that I landed at where that was encouraged and cultivated.
And you're now the CEO of the Elevate Prize Foundation. Can you talk to us about what it is that you guys do, just for people who don't know? I want them to hear from you what it is that you guys do and what it is that you're hoping to achieve in the next 5 years.
The Elevate Prize Foundation was founded. It'll be 6 years ago. It'll be 6 years ago that I was here. Just this week, August 26th is my anniversary tomorrow, and we were founded with this great belief that if we were able to build what we called at the time world's first global fan base for good, that we could do two really key things. One, we could draw attention to and shine a light on all those Mother Teresas around the world that were not seen and known, and be able to not just celebrate the incredible work that they were doing or the solutions that they had come up with, but leverage the fame and the attention on them to grow that solution, right? To be able to scale their work and attract more funding, build their audiences, et cetera, et cetera. So we really focused on all those elements of visibility that were completely missing in the nonprofit funding world around marketing, storytelling, social media, branding, websites, all these things that are key to any business in today's media and image saturated world, but was completely underrepresented and underfunded in the nonprofit world. So we set about that and what we called Make Good Famous. And what started happening quickly after, because of the way that our money is dispersed, we give a $300,000 prize that's completely unrestricted, which means the winners can use it for anything that they need to, which sets a very important precedent and tone right from the beginning, which is that we trust you, right? We know you know better than we do how to spend this money and what you need it for. And then we invest about as much, another 300,000 in their development over the 2 years that they're with us around all of these elements of visibility. Very important too, very tailored to each winner, because our winners come from across the world and across every issue area that you can imagine. So it looks very different what a campaign for a river cleanup organization in Bali needs versus a democracy organization in Washington, D.C. versus a prison reform organization in Kenya, right? But they also share a lot of things in common. What we began learning quickly is that not only did they need these really practical skills that we were giving them by way of the visibility piece, but they also really needed support as whole leaders. We needed to see all of the both challenges and gifts that they were bringing to the table that were being underutilized and under-resourced. And there came this philosophy that emerged over time that we now call whole leaders. So these are the two areas of impact and of focus for the foundation that began right from the beginning. And our founder's vision, our founder Joe's vision, that he himself wanted to invest in these leaders and couldn't find them. So it was really about us finding them and then helping the rest of the world find them, because we really believe that their story is hugely inspiring and more needed than ever today. And not only so that those solutions are supported, but so that more people see themselves in that work.
And I love that that your mission is to make good famous, because I feel that right now, if you log on to social media and you're just kind of scrolling through the explore page, a lot of it is just kind of mindless content, kind of, lacking real substance. So I think it's really great that you're helping people that are making a positive impact in the world. You're giving them the resources and a platform to really make an impact and to broaden their reach, which is incredible. Because again, look, I think, a funny mindless cat video on your feed every once in a while, like, it serves its purpose too. But really, I feel like we should be using these platforms to raise awareness about the good things that people are doing in the world, because there's a lot of scary stuff going on right now. So I feel like what you guys are doing is more important now than it ever has been.
Absolutely. But you bring up a really important point, because there's no reason you can't have both. And there's no reason they can't be in the same video. Like we call it, like, hiding the broccoli and the brownie, like you can have the cat video that's also telling you something meaningful, and maybe you could just have the cat video and it's just a cat video. But I do think that we have a certain level of impact fatigue in the world right now, because there's just so much happening. There's so many fires. There's so many issues at stake at the same time. And no, we don't want to make people feel hopeless at all. And in fact, we want to do the opposite. We want to inspire them that the solutions are out there and the hope is out there, and that hope is a strategy that we can use to uncover these incredible people doing incredible things and put our attention there, put our money there, put our energy there as followers, as donors, as believers, because these leaders need all of that. They don't just need the donations; they need the support in a million different ways. And the engine of fame and the engine of storytelling is so effective in terms of entertainment, making people laugh, educating them in a million different ways. Whether you're watching a cooking show or a home renovation show, it's not that pure entertainment can't teach people. It teaches people all the time. So why can't it teach people about solutions around climate change, or educating young girls, or whatever, or democracy, right? Or fair elections? I think that we got into the space of documentaries, which are wonderful, but it becoming this very sort of serious, heavy content that it didn't need to be. And really, Elevate Studios, which we launched in January at the Sundance Film Festival, is testament to that. It really is our approach and our strategic media arm to make good famous, right? To bring these stories to light in a way that's highly entertaining, and what we call delicious and nutritious content. And we know we can do it. We know that we've seen it. We launched the YouTube channel last year with a series called Nevertheless, which were 3 short mini docs on 3 of our women leaders, and it's gotten over 3 million views. Incredible. Right out the gate. We have almost 200,000 subscribers on YouTube in less than a year. So we know that we are hitting a stride. We know that we are reaching our audience, but it's going to get so much bigger than that, because we see, like you said, there's content creators out there who may have millions of subscribers, and they have this, audience of people who are really devoted to them. And many of them want to do good in the world, but they too may not be able to find that leader or that cause or that organization to get behind. So we see ourselves as the connector of those worlds. And I'm very excited for what Elevate Studios, what we have in store for them and for our winners, because again, we've seen the translation of the visibility leading to their organizations just growing exponentially. And it's almost like it was here all along, but nobody saw it. And going back to what I think I brought to this particular puzzle of social impact and nonprofit was just this willingness to try something different, to kind of disrupt a little bit the sector and do things that, 6 years ago, I think some of my colleagues truly thought was crazy. And now many of them are great partners of ours. And maybe that's just this conglomeration of being a child of refugees and an immigrant and someone who lives in India and women's studies, all these things, like this is the path that led me here. And I feel extremely lucky to have been given the opportunity to do this work. But it's not just me. I have an amazing team behind me all the time.
Okay, so you just said several things that I want to dive into a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I had never heard of impact fatigue until this month. You're the second person on this show to bring this up.
Interesting.
I just interviewed a man who puts together a huge music festival every year to raise awareness about opioid addiction in Appalachia specifically. And he was talking about how, at first, when they were first getting started, the community was very motivated and excited to get involved. But then after a while, they're starting to experience this impact fatigue where they're like, okay, we've heard about this. We don't want to have to listen.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to have to deal with this or think about it anymore. And I think that maybe a part of the problem is what you were just talking about, how the content around these issues, or even just in a documentary, is incredibly heavy. And so to your point, or to, back to the mission, creating delicious and nutritious content, I think is key to to help people, to sustain people's desire to want to make a difference and make an impact without, bombarding people with this heavy, pessimistic content.
It's a global, it's sort of a culture shift. It's a shift away from thinking about impact storytelling always needed to come through this lens of like, depression and something really heavy, and instead thinking about, we have a winner of our prize this year from Gold House, Bing Chen, who is largely responsible for so much of the incredible Asian entertainment content that we've been seeing in mass media over the past few years, from Everything Everywhere All at Once, that incredible Oscar-winning film, to so many television shows. And he's really the king of nutritious and delicious. It's really bringing, all of a sudden, we have so many more Hollywood actors and leaders from this Asian diaspora. And it was like building blocks of the entertainment world and a culture shift within that entertainment world to start telling those stories, as opposed to when I was growing up and you didn't see any of those faces and names in mainstream and Hollywood culture. So you kind of have to know how to infiltrate in a way that's really impactful and that people don't maybe even know it's happening. And then, or I think about last night, I was talking to my brother and my family about that wonderful movie, My Octopus Teacher. I don't know if you saw that movie. It was unbelievable. And how much you learned about the ocean and about this man's, even his depression, like all these heavy topics, right? And yet it was one of the most entertaining films I've ever seen in my life. Like, it can be done. It's done all the time. But we have to give people, I think, the benefit of the doubt and meet them where they are. And there's nothing wrong with it being funny, entertaining, and also have great meaning and impact.
I think another thing too is getting people invested in a story. Because I feel that if you just hear, if you hear a devastating statistic, that's, one thing. For example, if you read about an earthquake that devastated a city, that's easier to kind of dismiss versus
Right.
maybe we hear from a mom who was
Mm-hmm.
direct, and her children who were directly impacted by the earthquake. Suddenly people will start to pay more attention.
Right.
You.
That's right. And it's what you're saying, it's making it real for people. So in that Nevertheless series, that one of the segments was a woman named Teresa from Clean Start Africa, an organization in Kenya. She herself, she'd worked in the banking industry, and she was framed and ended up in prison for a couple of years with her newborn daughter. And of course, it completely upended her life. It seemingly would ruin her life. And she came out of prison determined to not let this happen to other women. And for most women coming out of prison, they were not employable after that. They were kind of at the end of the road and in a very bad position. So she started this organization to help those women who are coming out of prison to restart their lives. And it's everything from providing housing and shelter to all kinds of, job training, and really community support being the biggest part of it, so that these women were not alone and did not feel alone. They could be empowered to do more. That story of what women are going through in prison in Kenya would be completely abstract to somebody living in New Jersey, but if you watch this 7-minute film, which is all that it is, what you're able to learn and connect to this woman who's so similar to any mother any one of us would know or have in our own lives, it's become immediately you understand and you're embodied with this pain, this fear, this completely horrifying thing that happened to this person that could happen to any one of us. And it makes you care and have real empathy and compassion in a way that I think only storytelling has the power to do.
What is the impetus behind Nevertheless? And why are you guys choosing democracy defenders for season 2?
Great question. So the impetus of Nevertheless goes back almost to the beginning of Elevate, which was to put the leader in the center of the story. So many times in the nonprofit world, we're not looking at the leaders. We're looking at the organization. We're looking at the solution, but we're not really getting to know the founder or the leader of the organization, who many times is the reason the organization is there in the first place. In Teresa's case, this was her own personal experience of having gone through the prison system in Kenya. For most of our leaders, that is the case. They themselves were refugees. They themselves live in a highly polluted area that they're trying to clean up. They themselves have direct experience, lived experience with these things. So when we make them the center of the story suddenly becomes much more alive and meaningful and impactful than if we just share like an annual report with the world about how many lives that organization saved, which is typically how nonprofits have gone about this in the past. And all of that data and information is very important. I don't want to take away from that. But what inspired us to do series like Nevertheless, and larger than that, the studios in particular, which is the Elevate Studios as an organization or a part of the organization itself, is this idea that these leaders are much more than just the solution that they're trying to raise money for. They are the most fascinating, inspiring people. These are, again, the Mother Teresas all over the world doing the work that they were put on this earth to do, right? So that's why we felt that nevertheless, all of the obstacles that they face in the world, they still went forward. They still went after these solutions. They made it happen. Democracy defenders, I mean, look around. We need to be speaking about the importance of democracy, and not just in the US, all over the world. Democracy, which is largely just a promise, right? The idea of democracy is something that we agreed upon as a nation 250 years ago and or more at this point, and that we can see how easily it can crumble if we don't protect it. So I think that the series is going to take that question of what are those tenets of democracy? What does it really mean to people beyond party affiliation, beyond the things that divide us, but the values that really do unite us as a United States in particular and around the world, around this idea that we should all live in dignity and we should all be seen as whole human beings who deserve to live in peace. And democracy so far has been the best system for that around the world and throughout history. So I think it's really important to see it through the lens of a few different of our winners who are talking about defending, upholding, and innovating within democracy. Because sometimes it is a matter of these are really outdated institutions and systems, and that's why they're so vulnerable. And we do need to face up to that, and that many of us have sort of rested on our laurels. I mean, I wouldn't say this is everything happening today. There was a precedent for this, right? There's a pattern that led to this, and we can learn from history and what's happened in other countries. And so the storytelling, I think, will help people connect to it and connect to the leaders who are doing something about it, and hopefully inspire more people to care about it. Again, regardless of what party you're in, more about just protecting the tenets of what we founded this great democracy on.
And to your point as well, I mean, this is something that's happening all over the world. I've been reading that fascism is trending around the world right now.
It
Why,
is.
why do you think that is?
Oh my goodness, that's such a loaded question. But I think ironically, it's because of the very actions of these same governments, right? We've wreaked havoc and caused so many wars around the world, which has sent countless numbers of refugees and migrants around the world who would have much rather stayed in their own countries, I am sure, and raising their families in their own countries, but were forced to be displaced. And now entering new countries have caused all kinds of power imbalances and stressful situations for everyone involved. And what happens is that stress is then blamed largely on those migrant populations. And it's, in my opinion, largely unfair, but it's the reality of so many parts of the world that they are contending now with cultural influxes that this country has been, the US has been dealing with since its founding. And I felt like for a long time, we were a great example of that, of welcoming people into this country. And that's obviously changed in the recent past. And that's just one answer. I mean, I think there are so many answers to why this is happening around the world. But I do feel from a spiritual sort of, if you pull up and kind of look in a much more meta way at what this situation is, it's fear. It's a fear around there's a scarcity mindset, that there's not enough resources, there's not enough whatever it is to share with everyone in a given community, and an unwillingness to open our hearts and minds to people who may think and look and behave differently than us. And I think ultimately it is the greatest spiritual test of our lifetime, is how we deal with this moment, because we are facing down the barrel of this right now. And a lot is being lost already, but there's still a lot more that could be lost. And we need to figure out a way towards civil discourse again. We need to figure out a way to be able to speak across differences and be okay with that, and not be so divided and attaching ourselves to these identities, because the more we attach to the identity, the weaker our spiritual center becomes. And it's not about that. It's like what's happening inside of you. And inside of us, we are all exactly the same. So we have to get to that juicy center of what it is to be human, and connect with other people based on that, and let go of this fear that there's not enough, because that, I think, is really at the center of what's happening around the world.
I'm really inspired by what you guys are doing, because I think one of the big questions that you're answering is, how can we fit social causes into a larger conversation in a way that's current, that actually resonates with people? So the fact that you guys are creating this kind of content and giving giving people who are dedicating their lives to the causes that they believe in for the betterment of the world is so important, because again, I've never heard of anyone doing it quite like you guys are.
And when you get down, last year we had the incredible privilege to support two organizations, one in Israel, one in Palestine, two organizations working together as mothers. They're mother-led organizations who are like, we don't care about the politics of the situation. Just stop killing our children. Just stop. Stop this madness.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be done. We can meet in that place of humanity. And we have winners who are helping veterans heal through music in Tennessee. We have winners who are, dealing with with gender-based violence across the country. Do we talk about our politics? No, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that they're helping all of these folks heal from trauma caused by any number of things. And it doesn't matter at the end of the day what they're doing in the voting booth. What matters is that they can go to a voting booth. What matters is they have a voice that they can share with the rest of the world. And we have to protect for that, despite whether we agree with each other or not. And I think it was really a beautiful example of being able to support one of the most delicate situations in the world, what's happening between Israel and Palestine right now, and so much bloodshed and sadness on both sides of that. And to see two groups emerge that are able to speak to each other, what we should be able to learn from that. That's who should be getting the headlines right now, those two organizations.
And I'm so glad you just said that, because when you are overly concerned about which party you belong to, and you're willing to go to war, with another American just because of your political affiliation, you really do lose sight of what's important. And it is not in our best interest to fight with one another. That's for sure.
We all lose in the end.
Mm-hmm.
There's no winning in war. There really isn't. We've seen that so much through history.
And so when is season 2 of Nevertheless going to be out?
We are expecting it to drop in late spring, I would say, of 26. That's when we came out with the first series. And we're also in development with a couple of other really exciting projects. One of them coming out of one of our Catalyst Prize winners. Last year, we gave our Catalyst Prize to one of the greatest of all time NBA players, Dwayne Wade, who is a legend in and of himself as an incredible athlete, but also the proud advocate father of a trans daughter, Zaya, and has been super committed, along with his wife, to Zaya's well-being, protection for her and all trans youth across the country. And we are supporting, he came out with, his production company came out with a short that's on Netflix called The Dads. It's fantastic. It's 11 or 12 minutes. And it's about a group of fathers, all of them fathers of trans children. And what's, I think, really powerful about that film is showing exactly what we've just been talking about. Nobody cares what the politics are of these men. It's just the fact that they are fathers and they care desperately for their children, right? And now that's going to become a feature-length film that we're so proud to be involved with, and another film that I can't quite yet talk about, but we're going to be doing a lot more feature-length, bigger films. We're super excited about it and the kind of impact each of those films will be partnering with one of our winner organizations to bring greater attention to the work of our leaders who are around the world.
And Carolina, I actually read something about you that I also found very interesting. You are a meditation practitioner and teacher. How has your practice influenced the way you lead and support those around you?
Meditation and mindfulness, I would say mindfulness is an even more helpful word because it's about cultivating presence. Most human suffering, or the suffering we impose on ourselves, I'll say, is caused by either living in the future or living in the past. And those are two things we cannot control for in any way. You cannot change the past, and you have no idea what's going to happen to you 10 minutes from now. So the more you can cultivate a present mindset, the calmer you're going to be in moments of stress, which happen to us constantly, but certainly in the kind of work that our leaders are involved in. And it really helps us build our teams. It really helps us lead better as leaders. And there's a ton of data to back this up, from Harvard Business Review saying leaders who engage in regular self-care are more resilient and more able to manage stress, which in turn leads to better decision-making, more sustainable leadership. other public health studies that found that leaders who prioritize their own self-care report higher levels of employee engagement and job satisfaction. So we know that these things are important. So the more that we've brought it into our own organization, we have a retreat every February. We did the last one in Cape Town. This next one is going to be in Portugal, bringing our winners together, 20 of them, all around whole leader concepts. So there's mindfulness, there's meditation and yoga, but there's also tools like coaching and tools like different personality tests that help us understand ourselves and understand each other in teams. And out of that, we've seen our leaders now go on to do silent retreats, to bring mindfulness and meditation into their own teams, to use some of the unrestricted money that we give them to take their teams on retreats together. So this trickles out, it really does. And it begins with our own team at Elevate. We ourselves are really committed to this work and make room for it as a team. We do a staff retreat every year that is very much centered around these practices of whole leader. And it takes a while. It takes a while for people to come to this work. They're often intimidated by it. They think, oh, my mind is always racing. I can't stop thinking. That's the point. We all have that. It's called the monkey mind. It is completely normal to be that. So what happens, all that meditation really is awareness of that. And to say, okay, that thought is coming, let it go. Thinking mind, planning mind, worrying mind. These are all normal things. And it's the more you detach from that, it's just like what we were talking about earlier in terms of what ails human society and people at war. You just have to detach from your attachment to that idea, to that identity, and then it calms. It calms. I mean, it's shown by data to calm the vagus nerve, the central nervous system of our bodies, and we live, with less physical pain, physical ailments, and greater happiness is really the goal.
I think that people who do not place any emphasis on meditation, I think that is indicative of maybe a subconscious belief that the present moment isn't the most important moment there is. Because when people don't like to meditate because they don't want to be still, they don't want to be present, I guess, because like we were talking about, you get lost in your head. You could be thinking about the past or thinking about the future. But it is really interesting that people place more emphasis on both the past and future when you've never experienced them other than a thought. And even when you thought about them, it was now. And so I think that if more people would meditate and practice being present, I don't think we'd have a lot of the issues, even I dare say on a global scale, that we're experiencing in today's day and age.
I agree. So much of anger, rage, lashing out are people who don't have that kind of control, that self-mastery of just being able to immediately calm the mind in a moment. How many people would change what they did or said or acted out at people if they had had that practice? And it's called practice for a reason. This isn't something you do for a few months and then done. Like my mind is so calm. Like I've been meditating for 20 plus years. I still have to do it every day. And if I don't do it for a few days because life happens, I can tell, I'm definitely shorter with my kids, or I'm, more irritated by the traffic, or, these are things that are completely human issues every single day. So why not give ourselves some tools? One of my favorite is loving kindness meditation. It's metta meditation. And it's just this one phrase that you repeat yourself over and over and over again about loving kindness towards yourself. And then you can turn it outward toward others. And it's revolutionary, and and for people who really can't sit alone with their thoughts, there's great guided meditations that you can listen to. There's so many tools out there now.
And I think that one thing that also, kind of scares people away from meditating is that they try to sit down, they try to silence their mind, and it doesn't happen. So then they
No.
become frustrated.
Yes.
But I always tell people, if you sit down to meditate and you notice that your thoughts keep coming back up, you're already doing it right. It's bringing
That's right.
awareness.
That's right. It's really good in those cases. What most people who really struggle with meditation, they struggle with being embodied. So you're living in your mind most of the time. So you want to do things that help you feel the rest of your body. A particular kind of meditation for that is a body scan meditation. You can find these online, but it starts literally with like the crown chakra, the top of your head, through your eyelids, your ears, your throat chakra, into your chest. And you just either listen to someone do it, or you're just picturing all of that energy through your mind and your body. And immediately you will get away from those thoughts. Another interesting trick, which people don't know, is humming. It's almost impossible to have intrusive thoughts when you're humming. So many times, like when I teach yoga, I inhale and then exhale, like a hum. And you can't have an intrusive thought really when you're humming. So there's little tricks that just help people because we're all like this. That's why we had to invent meditation.
That's a good one. I've never heard that one before, and I look
Mhm.
into these things, so I'm
Mhm.
excited to try this.
Yeah.
You've touched on this several times, but I want to dig a little bit deeper into the whole leader perspective. Can you tell us what it is, what led to your creating this framework, and what difference you've seen it make?
I'll start with what led to it. It was largely inspired. I had been on this path myself for many, many years, as I referenced, as has been Joe, our founder. He's a yogi. He meditates. He does a lot of deep inner work and spiritual work. So we already had this in our own practices. It wasn't really what Elevate was about per se, but as we started uncovering and uncovering what was happening to our leaders, the struggles and the challenges that they were facing, and at the same time trying to build a really inclusive and intentional community with our winners. So we didn't see ourselves just as grant makers. We saw ourselves as co-conspirators in this larger goal of fixing the world, of making the world a better place for all people. To do that, we had to win the trust and build deep relationships with our winners. And in doing that, we had to then also face that it wasn't just about them leading an organization. They were facing a lot of other things in their lives that needed addressing. And because of the relationships that we were building with them, we felt called to help them in that journey too. So, Whole Leader came out of the deepening relationship, what people call trust based philanthropy, which is largely misnomered, I think, as being unrestricted funding. But I think it's much more about the relationships that we're building with these folks and deepening that through that inner work journey, and saying, we're here for you to give you resources around that, whether it's coaches, whether it's these retreats. And we've seen, the incredible impact that it's had on the winners and how they lead and their own happiness in their future and the kind of futures that they're planning out for themselves and their organizations. So the more we've seen that, and the more that I've seen this need in the larger nonprofit space and impact around the world, the more that I'm inspired to do this for many more leaders beyond Elevate. I'm really interested in developing a retreat model that would be much bigger and extend beyond just our Elevate Prize winners, and perhaps doing that in partnership with other foundations for, let's say, 60, 70 leaders at a time rather than just 20, because this is really needed by everyone and should not be a luxury that only certain people get to have access to. This is the kind of work that, like you said, all people should have access to meditation and have it be a part of their lives. So Whole Leader to me is that call to action of allowing these leaders to be whole people who have fears, who have obstacles, who have roadblocks, and also have amazing untapped potential that they may not be tapping into because they're stuck in some way, like so many people get stuck. And that these tools are not just about healing, some past traumas, which obviously it helps with that, but it's also about uncovering and sort of giving permission and license to dream big and keep growing as a person from the inside out.
And what advice would you give to young changemakers who want to scale their impact but don't know where to start?
I love that question because I always tell young people, like, do this when you're young and cute and no one can say no to you. Like, ask for all the internships, start all the organizations, do all of the fundraisers, because I can't ever say no to a young person who comes to me and wants to do an internship with us or wants to learn from us. Like, I really believe in supporting younger and younger generations, not only because I want them to thrive and do really well, but I want to continue learning. And I think that that cross-generational co-leadership is so, so important to be able to hear from young people what their perspectives are, what their solutions are. They see the world completely differently. I have a 13-year-old, 14-year-old tomorrow, and his perspective and how he wants to change the world is so different than it was for me when I was his age. So I think that's incredibly important for young people to feel empowered to be in the room with much older people, with big decision makers from a very young age. You should feel you have a place at the table. You may just be the note taker. When I was young, I was oftentimes in the room because I was just the note taker, but I got myself in the room. And I think just get yourself in the room, whatever that means, and know that you're not just a fly on the wall. You're very important to that conversation. So begin to take some risks and share your ideas. And, I was listening to a podcast this morning, about this woman, and she just kept kind of asking for this job at the Washington Post, like over and over. It had no chance of getting it. Finally, we're like, just call that woman, she won't leave us alone. And a lot of times it's just like, be that person who just insists. Those are the people who go far in the world. It's not that everybody doesn't have talents and gifts. It's who are the people who really are just, again, nevertheless, persevering and going after it. So for young people, take advantage of that while you're young, and people have a harder time saying no to you.
I love it. It's so true. And I'm also curious, what would you say about, to influencers who already have amassed a following, they have a voice on their platforms, and they want to get involved in something, but they just don't really know what to do next? Is there any way that they can work with Elevate Prize Foundation, or anything that you guys are working on?
Oh, yes, 1,000%. We are looking for those content creators all the time. We've partnered with many really influential creators who have millions and millions of followers, but who, like you said, maybe got famous or got a huge following from something that had nothing to do with impact, but then really did want to make an impact, or maybe started in one area of impact, but want to expand it, want to grow bigger. A lot of times they're very, very young, so they're learning at the same time where they want to make a difference. And we definitely are that resource. Like, we want to connect. And we're also starting last year for the first time fundraising and bringing in donors outside of our own founder. And this is really because we see, again, ourselves as this almost like clearinghouse that mitigates the risk for people who want to invest in solutions around the world, every kind of issue, but don't have the mechanism to do all the selection, the due diligence, the application process, but you can do it through us. Same thing as a content creator. You want to tell stories, or you want to partner with an organization like Ali Forney Center, like the biggest LGBTQ incredible organization in New York, one of the leaders in the world. How would you find Ali Forney? How would you know how to call Alex? We can connect you to the guy who runs that organization. We can connect you to the guy who's working with veterans and music in Nashville. Like, we can connect you with the woman who's doing democracy, right? Like that. We can make that go a lot easier. We work closely with UTA and CAA, two of the biggest agencies in the country, and their foundations. And they are, everybody's getting a lot smarter about this. And we're in fact going to an event in October in LA around this, around like bringing our winners and connecting them to content creators. And I see a huge space for this. And that YouTube growth that we've seen has just proven that to me. I mean, it is the place to be. And I'm really excited to see where we take YouTube in particular, so that we can partner with them. We gave an award, one of our Get Loud awards, to Mr. Beast a couple of years ago at the Streamies, which is like the Oscars of the streaming universe. And all the big content creators were there, and many of them came to us interested in, like, we want to have more impact. So we're happy to be that connector, very much. And we have the winners who can bring a ton of meaning and influence to the work that the creators are doing, because they need to learn from each other. That, again, that's a space where it's not just going one way. They can really learn a lot from each other.
Beyond the creators that want to work with you guys, Carolina, how can just anybody, make a difference and work with you guys?
The easiest and most fun way is to follow us on social media. On Instagram, we have a publicly voted nominated prize every month called Get Loud. It's $25,000 to grassroots organizations around the world. The topic changes every month, so it's a lot of fun to nominate and be a part of the action there. And that we share a lot of really fun content there. We gave our Catalyst Award to Sesame Street in May, and we've been posting the most fun content between our winners and the different characters from the Sesame Street gang. And then also, of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're dropping so much great content there. And we have a great newsletter, really wonderful newsletter that they can sign up for on our website. And on our website is information about all of our winners and the work we do. I mean, unlike I can easily say any foundation in the world, we really know how to tell a story. We really know how to brand and make things, again, nutritious and delicious. So if you're interested in this kind of work and in these kind of leaders, there's lots of ways to follow us, and each way is unique. And so I would tell people to follow them all.
Well, I'm going to include the links to your website and all of your social media profiles in the episode notes. So anybody who is interested in learning more, want to get involved, you can easily click on them there. And Carolina, after years of championing artists and entrepreneurs, what do you see as the most urgent challenge and the greatest opportunity for today's leaders?
Goodness, I think it's to stay centered, to stay present, I think is extremely challenging. We are being distracted by a million different types of things, right? And from whether it's AI or the news or any number of things, I think that is a huge challenge, is for leaders to feel they can be present in the work that they're doing. And I think the greatest opportunity is storytelling. I really believe that the more leaders learn about how to tell their story, to tell it effectively and connect with the audiences who are going to make the biggest difference for their solutions, it's like a hockey stick. I mean, we've seen it over and over in terms of the growth that they realize once they're able to do that. And we are so privileged to be able to do that for 10 new winners every year, but that's a drop in the bucket. Like there's so many more, and we're actually hoping to develop a series of educational tools that will be open source so more leaders can learn some of these really great tricks of the trade, because that's oftentimes what they are. But if you don't have access to like how to make a really effective video or how to launch a podcast or how to write a book, like these are things that could really make the difference. So we hope we can do that for a lot more leaders in the future. But storytelling, that's where it's at.
And Carolina, what is the biggest lesson you've learned personally throughout the course of your career?
I would say to really focus on relationships, to over-index on relationships. As a leader, we can spend a lot of time busy in the numbers, in the spreadsheets, in the strategic plans. None of those things matter if you're not working on the relationships with your team, with your donor partners, with your media partners, whoever it is that's really making your organization tick. Don't take people for granted. Get to know them and deepen those relationships and steward those relationships, because that's the I think the through line for most really successful people is that they've been very good at that. And certainly that's been something I've learned to value more and more over time.
If you could go back in time and offer your younger self one bit of advice specifically tailored to you and your life's journey right before embarking on this career, what would it be?
Probably not to be so hard on myself. I've been studying the Enneagram lately. I don't know if that's something you've ever gotten into, but it's
Yes.
really fascinating. And my particular number, I think I'm an 8.
I'm an 8 too.
Are you an 8? Yes. So we're hard on ourselves, and I was like that a lot. And I grew up in a pretty critical household. So I internalized a lot of that stuff. And I think if I could go back and say, like, don't do that, don't fall into that trap, it would have saved me a lot of heartache, unnecessary suffering, I think. But that was my path. I had to learn it. And, it is what it is. I'm sure I grew because of it, but that's something I could probably do without.
Carolina, thank you so much for your time. It really was such an honor getting to talk to you today. I have so much respect for you and all the work that you guys are doing, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here.
Oh, I'm the one who's so grateful to you for giving me an opportunity and for reaching your audience and your listeners. And I'm super grateful for their interest in this work and some of these ideas that I hope they take with them and are inspired by to have a greater impact in their own lives, because they've got this one shot at this life. So make the most of it.